All right, we are live. Afraid for this day number 2. Welcome everyone to the Windows Server 2019 course. This is part 2 or day 2, whatever you want to call it. My name is Jamal Barnes. I am someone who demonstrating about Windows Server 2019, and we're also talking about the cloud. I do have a certification in Microsoft Certified Solutions Expert, which was accomplished a few weeks ago. And so, just to give a brief recap for those of you who missed out, if you missed out on the video from yesterday, I highly recommend you check out the channel for that previous video, as it contains some very important things regarding about how to install Windows Server, the different editions, well, should I say the 3 most important editions that you should know about, and installing and setting up domain controllers. Now, yesterday we set up 2, and I said we were going to set up the 5 domain controllers. And so what we're going to do to start off, I'm not going to do a lot of talking about different things that have occurred. We're just going to go ahead and get started. Now, just an FYI, what I had to do was I had to make a couple of changes this morning due to some issues with the machine, but we have fixed those issues, and I think we are ready to get started. Now, we're going to start with the 3rd domain controller. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start setting up that domain controller. This domain controller is going to be server core. So, the difference is that, the big difference is that this time around I'm going to set this one up through sconfig. Everything about it through sconfig. And then once we set up this 3rd domain controller, while we're also doing that, we're going to set up 2 test workstations. And then we'll also be talking about DNS server as well as DHCP. So let's get started. So this is how you would set this up. Of course, I'm running Hyper-V. So all of this is virtualized. So let's get started. So we'll create that virtual machine with that new server, or as I like to call our 3rd domain controller. Make this a little bit bigger. I wish I could just make this. I wish I could make this a little bit bigger, but I cannot for whatever reason. Let's see. Maybe we can make this a little bit bigger so that everybody can see what we're doing. So I'll start off with making that VM. Name is, because I normally do all my VMs through PowerShell. You can do it from the GUI graphical user interface, but as I mentioned yesterday, it is very, very limited on what you can do and what you cannot do. So we'll call this DC03-SRV. I'm going to give this 1 gig of RAM to it, just to get this all situated. We're going to make this a Gen 2 VM because I want extra security. You definitely want the extra security. If you have some older devices, then you just make this a Gen 1. And then we'll say new VH This is where we're going to store that VM. So in my case, I have a folder called VMs in a separate drive. So I'll just call this 03.vhcx, and we're also going to create a couple other virtual machines as well, but those are going to be for the 2 workstations as our testers. Eventually, I'm going to join my regular machine to the domain later on tonight, but I just want to show you what will happen once you join this to the domain. So, like so. And so let's see, that is our path. 100 gigs for space, and we will put it on this switch. Make sure you have it connected to your virtual switch, otherwise this will not work if you do it this way. And then, do we need anything else? I do not think so. And I think that's all we need for this portion. So it's going to take a minute. And let's see what happens. Yeah, sometimes you have to give it a few seconds. And I should get an alert, get a statement confirming that that virtual machine has been created, which it has. So now all we need to do is just add that ISO that I downloaded yesterday for the servers, for Windows Server, that is. So I'll just say add-VM DVD drive. VM name is that virtual machine we just created. And have this will be where we're pointing to. Whoops. And there it is. And then I'm going to go ahead and get this thing started. So we'll start up that third domain controller for the most part. Not as much as far as the virtual machine, not the controller itself. Just to be clear. So I'm going to go up to settings, make sure that the ISO starts first. Click apply, click OK, and then we'll hit start. And again, this portion will look just like your Windows 10 machine. Well, similar to installing Windows 10, which I'll show you in a second. So we'll go ahead and hit next, click install, or install now, so to speak. Give this a few seconds. And in this case, we're going to make this a core server. So I'm just going to bubble in data center evaluation. If you are new to this, just also a brief recap, as I mentioned about yesterday, data center gives you extra functionality that standard does not. However, it does cost a lot more for the license for it. Just a heads up. So we'll hit next. This is terms of agreement. Check that box, and then click next, and then we'll click custom, and then click new, and then it'll say to ensure that all Windows features work properly. Windows might create additional partitions for some files. That's perfectly fine. We'll click OK. And then what will happen is we'll then click next, and then we'll let that install. While that's going on, we're going to go ahead and create those VMs. The other two VMs, those are going to be our test workstation machines. So what I'm going to do is go through and we'll change this. We'll change a couple things around. Actually, never mind. Might not need to do it that way. We'll just do it this way. New -VM -name. We'll call this a double SPC, and then search 2. Just like we were doing with the server, I'm doing the same thing with these two workstation machines. These are going to be our testers. So we'll start with memory startup bytes. I'll give these about, can't do this by decimal. Actually, no. 2 gigs. 2 gigs a piece, I think, should suffice. There are two types of files as far as virtual machines go with Hyper-V. There's a .bhd and there's a .bhdx. The main difference is the .bhdx is the later version format, so to speak. So just putting that out there. But we'll go ahead and this. Each of these, I'll give these 100 gigs a piece. So we're just testing. And then what we want. And by the way, my switch, my virtual switch that I have here is an external switch. Basically what an external switch does is it connects not only to the host that is hosting the virtual machines, but also it connects also to the host's internet connection as well. It makes it much easier for testing purposes. So just putting that out there. And then I'm going to just go ahead and go just up arrow. And we'll just change this. Let's see. There it is. I think that is the enterprise ISO, I believe. And press enter. And then I'm going to make one more before we get started. So all I'm going to change is just a couple parameters. I just did an up arrow to do this. Change that to 2. Change this to 2. Change this to 2. And then I just did that in a few seconds with the lovely up arrow. And then do the same thing here. Just add a -2 here. Put a 2 over here. And then we're going to do VM Connect now. And I'm going to boot up both of those virtual machines, those 2 workstations that I just created. So what will happen, I'm just going to go ahead and click on this right here. Go up to File. Make sure that the DVD starts, or in this case, they call it a DVD drive, just make sure that the ISO that we attached for the image comes from here first. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and boot that one up. And then I'm going to also bring up the other VM that I just created. So bring up 002. And then hit settings. Make sure that is first priority, because we haven't installed the operating system on here yet. And sometimes you just have to catch it in time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and maximize this screen. And you'll see this, if you're installing Windows 10, you'll see this come up first. Very similar to what you may have installed Windows 10 in the past. So we'll click Install Now in this case. Just give it a few seconds. There's your license agreement. Check this box, click Next. Click Custom, and then click New, and then go ahead and hit Next. We'll minimize that one, and I'll do the same thing for our other workstation. Okay. So we'll click I accept the license terms, Custom, New, Apply. Click OK. Again, it's very similar to how you will install this on a Windows Server machine, with a couple of differences. So we'll go ahead and minimize these. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and close out of those for right now. Let's bring up the server that was just installed. Make sure it's large. Hit Connect. And then it'll say administrative user's password must be changed before signing in. So we'll click OK and we'll change that password. This is just for the local admin account. Okay, and as I mentioned yesterday, you want to make sure you have more than one domain controller, especially if you have users that do log on to your organization, so that in case one of the domain controllers fail, you will then be able to allow your users to still be able to log on to the system. Okay? And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just do bring up sconfig. And if we can make this a little bit bigger, if I could just increase the font size a little bit, that's perfectly fine. Now, so this is sconfig. This is also a way for you to configure your entire server initially. Yesterday, I talked about how you can configure this server through PowerShell. But today, I'm just doing it through sconfig. So, we'll start with computer name first. Because we're going to change the name to what we named our virtual machine when we first created it. So we'll just say EC03, which is domain controller. And it'll come up with a box that says you must restart your machine to apply these changes. We start now, I'll click yes. And then it's going to go ahead and restart that server. So it may take a little bit of time. If I can find it. Sorry, we're having a little technical glitch here. Let me just, hopefully I can fix that. And there we go. So we'll see if we can bring that back up. And we're back, and we've got it back up. So I'm going to go ahead and log back in. And I am going to just type in sconfig. And then what we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this server is up to date, just like all the other servers we've built. And it'll come up with this option, search for all updates are recommended. I usually choose A. And then it's going to, so what it's going to do now is it's going to go ahead and find, locate, and install all those updates that it needs to install. So just give it a few moments while it locates those updates. While that's going on, we're going to check on the other two test workstations. Let's check on those. I'm going to just type in via connect from up here. And then what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the other machine that we just set up. And of course, I'm using an evaluation copy, but this is all relating to Windows 10. We are using Enterprise for the best functionality. I always recommend if you have it in your budget to go ahead and just use Windows 10 Enterprise. You'll thank me later. And it'll say, would you want to add a second keyboard layout? I'll hit skip. And then just give this a few seconds, give it the spinning Cheerio. And like I said earlier, these are just test workstations. Now, if you're, what we'll get into eventually in a separate course is, typically in an organization, you typically will see folks use an imaging system like a Microsoft Deployment Toolkit or Windows Deployment Services or SCCM. What I'm going to talk about is SCCM and Endpoint with Microsoft Intune, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Right now, I want to go with domain join instead, so we'll click on that. And then we'll say, who's going to use this PC? I'm just using a local account for this. This is basically just a local administrative account that we're setting up just for Windows 10 purposes, and it'll say you can ask you to set up these security questions. So unfortunately, you have to answer these security questions now before you did not have to. So I'm just going to answer the questions, and then it'll come up, have you choose your privacy settings. I'm going to just turn all these off. And then click accept. And it'll say use Cortana. I'm going to say not now, because we really won't need Cortana. Which actually you can block Cortana if you are using Enterprise or Pro. You can disable Cortana from group policy to all of your workstations. So while that's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. So I hit A over here when I brought up this other server back. And right now it is downloading its update. So right now, while that's going on, we're going to go ahead and set up our the other test workstation. So I'll go ahead and exit out of that. Bring up VM Connect once again. And then I'm going to click on the other machine that I have. Now, typically with an organization, you'll have, obviously, you're probably going to have more than 2 workstations. You may have, in a large organization, you may have thousands upon thousands of workstations, and typically they will have so many different teams doing so many different things. Now, of course, in a small organization, you might be the jack of all trades, basically. But if you're on a system admin team, this is not something you will be doing. This is something Help Desk will be doing. But for testing purposes, I am the one setting all this up. So I'll say, for this one, I'll just say work admin, create my password. And again, just like on the other machine, I have to answer these security questions. So, not that they'll really matter better for me, because they will not in the grand scheme of things. But unless I forget the password, not that they will matter, because once the machine is joined to the domain, I can do the password resets from Active Directory. I won't even need the security questions. This is just for the local account that is associated with that machine. All right. And let's see, this is the last security question. Okay. Accept. Not now on the Cortana screen. And what we're going to do while that's loading up, I'm going to close out of this one, and let's check on, see how the updates are going on this server. Right now they're still installing, so we'll go back and go to our test machine. Well, one of our test workstations, I should say. And then we'll go ahead, so I'm going to go ahead and log on to this test work machine. And if you're using an imaging system, you will not have to do this next part, what I'm about to do, because normally updates are already installed, already built onto the image. But because I did not do it that way, we're going to have to run updates. So that's what we'll be doing. If you see, you're doing WinVer, and right now I can tell this version is older. So I'm going to go ahead and just make sure that this machine is up to date. Make sure this is turned on just like on Windows Server, like we talked about yesterday. And then we'll just say check for updates. We do not need to. We will not be changing any IP settings or anything like that on either one of these test workstations, because everything's going to come from the DHCP server that we're going to configure once we finish the domain controller. All right. And by the way, we'll be using a lot of server core in this course, so I'll be doing DHCP the exact same way, but I will show you how to manage DHCP from your Windows 10 machine if you need to. I'm just going to go ahead and adjust this for a second. And alright, so this is what, so make sure that's going up to date. I'm going to minimize out of that one, bring up the other workstation. Okay, and we'll do the same thing on this workstation as well. So go up to settings, update and security, advanced options, make sure that these are turned on, and then click check for updates. Let those two get up to date, and then what we're going to do, we can go back to the server. Right now it's still trying to install that update. The reason being is that this update right here takes up a lot of space. In fact, this update is about 15 gigs. So while this is going on, we're going to go ahead and set up and create the other server, which will be, this one is going to be the DHCP server. As I mentioned earlier, we were going to go into that. So let's just do up arrow. Change this one to DHCP. Whoops. Let's change that to SRV. DHCP. This is one, let's say, and this one I'm going to set up through PowerShell like we did yesterday. So just a word to the wise. We'll change this one to DHCP. And I think that is all we need for that portion. Up arrow. And we'll just go ahead and change this one to the other server image, and then just change this to DHCP 01-SRV, and then that's all we need to do. That's just two things we have to do to get the virtual machine started. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and, if I can bring back up PowerShell, bring that back over here, type in VM Connect, and I'm going to bring up the DHCP server that we just created, just like so. Hit File, hit Settings. Make sure that's set to top priority as the image first. Click Apply, click OK, and then click Start. And then this will bring up our installation screen. And the big thing about with IT, you'll be doing a lot of this at the same time to speed up the process a little bit. So we'll click Install Now. And then we'll set this to data center evaluation without the desktop experience. Click next. Check the terms and conditions box, click next, and then click custom, and then click new, click apply. Just like you would on Windows 10, just like any other server with Windows. This is the same exact process. It may seem repetitious, but that's just the initial part when you get it to getting it installed. And as I mentioned yesterday, if you are installing this on an on-prem instead of a virtual machine, you will need to install drivers. If you're doing it through server core, you have to do it use pmputil. That command. You will also need to know about slmgr.vps to activate it. You can use, what you might want to do is use do slmgr.vbs/ipk, which will be and then you type in the product key, and then if you want, you can set up what we call, you can activate it while doing slmgr.vbs and then space and then /ATO, which will then do an online activation. So there's something to think about. But like I said, because we're doing because we are doing certain things, and because I'm using the evaluation copy, we will not need to go through getting it activated, because it's already activated as part of for at least 180 days. On server, for Windows 10 Enterprise, when you use the evaluation copy, they give you up to 90 days. So just something to think about. Enterprise is expensive. It is a very expensive license, so is Data Center. I mentioned about the pricing of Data Center yesterday. Enterprise is now part of a subscription, which you'll have to have E5 level licensing. So again, just something to think about. Something that I'm putting out there. Alright, so with this one, let's go ahead and change the password. Okay, and then I am going to go ahead and start just type in start PowerShell, and this will come up. Now, I'll show you on another server we built, I'll show you how you can run PowerShell right through this command line box without having to do start PowerShell, if you do not wish to. So right now, let's do rename -computer, new name HCP. And what I just did there, I just typed in that command and with a parameter of restart, so that it automatically will restart that machine. I'm going to continue to configure this DHCP server until we get to the portion where it's running updates, and then I'm going to go back and check on the other server. So, just type in start PowerShell. And I'm going to go ahead, we're going to start running our updates, making sure that everything's up to date. So the first thing I have to do, because I'm doing this one all through PowerShell, is I have to run this installed as module, because we need the module for this, which is PS Windows Update. So just give it a few seconds. So we'll say yes to this. Then there will be another option, which we'll also have to say yes to, or yes to all. And then I will go ahead and run get blue. Let's just see what updates are out there. Microsoft update. Give it a few seconds. It may take a little bit of bit of time to check to see what updates are out there, and there's another command I have to run just to get them installed. So we'll go ahead. In this case, I've got 4 updates listed here. So we'll go ahead and run this command, which is install -Windows Update, accept all, and then force download, force install, which, by the way, I'm just tabbing, pressing the tab key. If you do the tab key after you set the parameter, it will then allow you to self-populate, if you will, and then hash verbose so that we can see exactly what's going on. And then this is all that we need. So we'll go ahead and this one's going to run all of its updates and everything. Also, I did not put in, notice I kind of did this deliberately. I didn't put a -Microsoft Update, and by not doing so, that's why it did not pull up one of the updates from this list. But that's okay, we'll install that later once we finish up this batch. While that one's updating, I'm going to minimize, I've minimized it as that server. We'll bring up this one back up, and it'll say a restart is required to complete Windows updates. So we'll click yes, and then give this a few seconds. While that's going on, I'm going to bring up the other machine, see how we're doing there. We're 74%. Let's check our other workstation. About 90% there, which will probably be done in about a few moments. And this is just running Windows 10 20H2. I've seen it many times. So we'll go ahead and restart that machine. And let's check our other workstation. This one's going to take a little bit of time. In the meantime, I'm going to also change the date and time, make sure that this is set correctly. Eastern Standard Time, because I'm based in the Maryland area, so keep that to Eastern Standard Time, and then we'll go back home, and then this is only about 83%. In the meantime, let's go back to our third domain controller. And let's do, remember we said this one was going to be sconfig. So I'm going to go through, look past number 6 again, and see if there's any other updates out there lingering around or whatnot. So it looks like there's 4 updates, so we'll go ahead and install those. While we're doing that, it's downloading its updates. What I'm going to go ahead and do, let's go back to this other machine, restart the other workstation, and again, I'm just doing a little bit of multitasking, so to speak. So while that one's updating, we come back down to this one. Bring up the other machine. Okay, so we'll go ahead and log back in and check to see if there are any extra updates lingering around. So click on that, click on update and security. Just make sure there's no extra updates lingering around. We'll do the same thing for the other workstation. Let's give it a few moments. Alright, so now we're back up. On this workstation, I'm going to go ahead and log back in. Let's give it a second. And I'll do the same thing for this workstation. Let's just make sure we're just checking for updates. Make sure there's no extra updates lingering around. While that's going on, I'm going to go ahead and look at our domain controller. If I can get to it. We want DC03. Let's check on our domain controller, the third one. And then we'll say, press return. So there's no other updates. And then we'll hit number 8. Index of 1, so I'll just tap 1. Tap 1 again. We'll say type in S for static IPs. Remember I said you want to make sure all of your servers should be static IPs and not automatically generated. Okay. And new preferred DNS server. So we're going to point to our first domain controller. So we'll just type in 10.0.0.2. There's 4 on that box. Tap on 9 so we can change our date, change our time zone. Just like so. Click OK. And then hit 15. So we can go back. Exit back to the command line. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go through and I'm just going to, I think we've done everything we need to do in here. Actually, there's one more thing I wanted to do. It's enable the remote piece to it, so we can remote into the server at any given time. So I'll set 7, so tap 1.7, and then tap 1E. And then they'll say allow only clients running remote desktop with network level authentication. So I'll select 1. So what that basically means is only if you have certain admin rights you can remote in. And if you do not, I will have that disabled by default. So let's exit out of here. And then now I'm going to go ahead and let's go into PowerShell. Because what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead first. I want to disable IPv6 on this thing. So we'll do the set disable dash net adapter binding dash name is Ethernet because we know that that's the only interface that's associated. And then I'm going to say component ID ST underscore TCP IP6. By the way, you can also use this if you want to disable IPv4 and you only want IPv6. You can just, if you take out the 6, just like that, and you press enter, it will disable IPv4 from this machine. So in this case, I just want to disable IPv6. So I'll just add a 6 and just press enter. And so, now that IPv6 is disabled, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and install our Active Directory domain services on this domain controller. Domain services include management tools, because I'm going to be managing this from my Windows 10 machine later on, and I'll explain how that works a little bit later. So we'll say include all sub features, and what that's going to do is it's going to install that role. Just give this a few seconds. While that's installing, it shouldn't take that long. It shouldn't take this long to install. It's only like maybe about a minute. I think maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes tops. So just keep that in mind. Okay, now that that is installed, what we're going to do. So yesterday we set up the forest. Today all we're doing is we're just setting up the. We're just adding this to another domain. So all we have to do is just do install -adds domain controller and then domain name. I specified all this yesterday, so I'll say corp1 on Microsoft.com. And again, I'm just tabbing through safe mode administrative password, convert to secure string. And by the way, I will be changing this later. But this is just a temporary password for this. As plain text -force and then we'll just say credential. I'm going to use this credential right here, administrator. And then what I want to do, cannot bind credential. So let's see, what am I doing wrong? That's why. Sometimes that will not work, so then I have to do get credential as a workaround. Whoops, my mistake. And now I'm going to just go ahead and type in the username that I set yesterday. I have not added any users or anything yet, which we'll get into later. And you'll get this message that says the target server will be configured as a domain controller and restarted when this operation is complete. I'll just tap A, press enter, and just give this a few seconds while it installs everything it needs to be promoted to a domain controller. And let's see. I'm going to go ahead and click close, and it's going to then restart. And once this restarts, I'm going to check on our other machines, the 2 workstations, and like this one right here. So we'll go out to our DHCP server. Click yes. We'll tap Y for yes, and then we'll go ahead and restart. Just give Just for a moment. While that's going on, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this machine. I'm going to go ahead and bring up one of our workstations. And right now, this machine, I believe, is ready to go. Or as I like to call it, it's ready for prime time. So I'll go ahead and minimize and just close out of that, minimize that, bring up the other machine. And I think this one is ready as well. Alright, so we'll close out of that. Now, we got our two workstations already configured and set up for right now. But we're not ready. We're still not ready to join this to the domain yet. We still have a couple other things we have to do. Okay, so let's go over to the DHCP server and just give it a few moments while it finishes up its updates and configuration and everything. So we'll go ahead and type in this password. So local, again, this is just a local admin account. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and run, add Microsoft Update to it, and see if there's any other updates that we need to install. I know there were a few from earlier, so we'll just go ahead and get those installed. While that's going on, let's bring up the other domain controller right here. There you go. You'll see sign in. The reason why I said sign into Barnes, because yesterday that is what I set the domain net BIOS name to where this is where you sign on to. But you can set this to whatever you want, whatever, preferably whatever your name of your company is. Like if it's FDA, you just type in FDA. If it's whatever the name of your company is, it doesn't matter. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just go ahead and log on to this, which is to verify that everything is working properly. And I believe that is it. There we go. This is our domain controller. So all three of them are set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of this domain controller, and we're going to go ahead and go into the check on our DHCP server. Right now that's still installing updates, so we'll go ahead and close out of that. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is, I'll show you guys some other tricks up my sleeve. Let's go back to that third domain controller. I just want to make sure that, actually, never mind. We won't need that for right now. Let's go back to our first domain controller. Alright, and this is where we're going to get into the DNS side. And I'll show you both the graphical user interface as well as the core side. We're going to start off with the core side. So let's just go into that. Go to BC01. I'm going to set up the other two domain controllers later on, but that is how you, those are three ways that you can set up a domain controller. Or at least initially, how do you set up a server? Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to log on to this server, so to speak. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is just go ahead and start PowerShell. Alright? And what we want to do is we want this to be able to be configured so that anyone who is joined to the domain still gets internet access. Because once the machine is joined to the domain, if there's no forwarder set up, they do not get any internet access once they're logged on. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to do a get, make sure there's no forwarder set up, DNS, we can just do get DNS server, give us some information, and that gives us way too much information. So what we can just do git command. And I'll start with this first. I'm just going to type in DNS as a wildcard. And you'll see all these different commands here just for DNS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do see that we have a option for primary zone. I'm not worried so much about scavenging. I'm more concerned about creating a zone. So it's add instead of new. So we're going to just create a primary zone. But before we do that, I'm going to run this command here. So we have the latest help files for each of these commands. Because I don't expect anyone to memorize all these different commands. PowerShell has millions, in my opinion, what seems like an unlimited supply of commands. I don't expect everybody to memorize these commands. But what I want folks to do is be able to, when you don't know the command for something, just do like a wildcard, or you can narrow down the commands for whatever role you need. So right now we're just going ahead and updating our help files. So just give that a few seconds. I say about maybe 60 seconds. While we're doing that, I'm going to do a couple trust but verify. I like to call it the trust but verify. So let's go over to our workstation, make sure we're able to see the other domain controller. I'll just type in CMD. And what I'm going to do is just make sure we're able to ping our domain controller, which we are, which is a good sign. So always trust but verify, because sometimes things can go wrong in the world of IT, as we all know. So let's look for DC01. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, make sure that's up to date. Let's add a zone. So I'll do add DNS primary zone. So what I'm going to do is primary zone. There we go. DNS server primary zone. So you have to be it's very particular on what it looks for. So add that DNS primary zone. I'm just tabbing over. This is a good little shortcut to have. You can call this, and we'll just say warp1.onmicrosoft.com. Update. Secure only, so that means they only get them if they're joined to Active Directory. There's a couple other things I need to do. Make sure there's nothing else I need to do. Application scope. Throughout the forest. Okay, so we'll start with that. And do we need anything else? Failed to create zone. DNS server primary zone. Let's try that. Alright, so sometimes we have to figure out what's going on here. And it probably, to be honest, it probably already created a zone. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is add get-DNS server forwarder. And looks like we haven't set those up yet. So what we'll go ahead and do, I'll just say add DNS server forwarder dash IP, we'll say 75. I'm just going to point this to my internet service provider. 75.75. 70 or 8. And then run that again. There it is. You'll see that those IP addresses right there, which is right over here if you want to see that. These are the forwarders that we're setting for our DNS server. And then what I want to do is and it's probably because, and to be honest, now this is where if you want to create a zone, you just do this and it'll create one. The reason it was giving out the error message, by the way, is because the zone was already created when we set it up the domain controller. So just something that, again, just a good learning curve. Always do trial and error. So let's go into, I think this is all we need to do. Let me just make sure we're able to ping an address, which we're good to go there. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close out of this one because I think we are already done our DNS. I'll move DNS here. Let's go over to DHCP and go back up to set as time zone. Let's do Eastern Standard Time. Just do time zone, verifies that's the right time zone, followed by get-date, tells you that it's the right date. If you need to change it, just run this command right here, set-date, and then you can change it to however you want. With a couple parameters, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and install DHCP on this server. Dash name DHCP, include management tools, include all sub-feature. Make sure DHCP is installed on this server. And there's a couple other things we haven't done yet, but we haven't configured this yet. So it's going to come up with that message, but we are getting ready to set up a static IP. So let's go ahead and do that. New -net IP address. Well, actually, let me run get first so we can see what IP it's getting. Okay. So we will go ahead and new -net IP address followed by interface index of 6 followed by IP address of 10.0.0. So we're just going to make this one .5. The prefix length. Again, this is, if you know subnetting, you know about the slash, a /1, difference between a /1 and a /32, 1 to /32. So this will be 24, which is 3255s and then not 0. And then default, let's see, default gateway. We'll keep this at 10.0.0.1. Alright. And then we'll say set-DNS client server address, interface index of 6, and then I'm going to say server address 10.0.0.2 because we want to point up to the back to that domain controller. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then make sure that I'm able to ping this address before we continue configuring this. Hang on a second. That's 0.0.5. Which it is not. So I'm going to just go ahead and uninstall DHCP. Okay. Let's see if we can get Alright, I'm going to go ahead and disable net adaptive binding and just disable IPv6 altogether. Okay, let's see. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and add this DHCP server to the domain. Okay? So the way you do it is just do add-computer. Let's see. But before we do that, I just want to make sure we're able to ping our domain controller's address, which we are. Alright. And we're going to run add-computer dash This is just the admin account that is on the domain. Flap OK. Specified domain either does not exist or could not be contacted. Okay. So let's see what is going on with that. Or could it be? Let's try it. Let's see, let's figure out what's going on here. This is kind of some basic troubleshooting. Specified domain could not exist. Does not exist or could not be contacted. So let me see. Could it be that? Yes, I think I found our issue right there. So what we need to do is we need to run set-DNS client server address interface index of 6 server address .0.0.2 type. Run git again, and let's try that once more again. So and I'm still getting the same message. Oh, I forgot. Also, wrong domain. Make sure that is on Microsoft. let's try this once more. Straight tool. And now it should be able to restart. So a couple things. Sometimes when you're doing something wrong, I mean, this is live as live can be. So sometimes you may have some issue, you may run into an issue, and you have to troubleshoot to figure out what the issue is. And once you fix that, that is about it. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and run as. Actually, we don't want that. What we want, administrator. I'm going to create a user account later on once we get this one situated and underway. Alright, so now let's bring back up PowerShell, and what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to just uninstall and reinstall DHCP. Off of the server. That's fine, so I'll just say restart to my computer. Okay, let's try again. And then we'll say start PowerShell. Actually, I'm just going to up arrow. Actually, never mind. It won't let me. Alright, let's make this bigger. And then install dash Windows feature name DHCP. Give it a few moments while this installs. Okay, now we can do this. Git command. Actually, I'll just run update dash help on this server as well. Make sure we have the latest versions of the command that we need. Just give this a few seconds. Again, this is just like how you would set this up in your corporate environment. Well, very, very similar. Sometimes in a corporate environment, you might have 2 or maybe 3 DHCP servers. If you've got thousands upon thousands of users, subnetting can help you. The lower the slash, the higher the amount of IPs that you can set up. That can generate an address. So just keep that in mind. What else I want to mention about? Alright, so we'll just say git command wildcard DHCP, and we see we have these are all the commands, by the way, for setting up your DHCP server. Now, what I want to do is I want to set up a scope or a range of addresses that it'll generate. It's not only this, but there's a couple things you have to do. One is I'm going to go ahead and do this first. DHCP server scope. There it is. And then what we want, next name, we'll call this scope. And then what we want, I'm going to say start range. I'm going to say I'll start with from .30, end range will be 10.0.0. I guess we'll say take it up to 250. We'll say. And then lease duration, I'll say 30 days, so every 30 days. What this basically means is every 30 days the IP address will change on each machine. Dot 00 dot 00. And then I'll say description. You can make this your own little thing, and I'll also say my DHCP server. And let's see if there's anything there. State is active. Oh, I forgot one other thing. 255.255.0. And then I'll say, now we'll run this command here, get-DHCP server v4 scope. And this is just for IPv4. I've not set it for IPv6 yet, which we'll do later on another day. But you see that when you run this, you'll see everything that we set. This is our scope ID and everything. Now we're going to go ahead and authorize it on the domain. So we'll say DHCP server in DC, DNS name, which will be, or let's see what other options you get. We could say 10.0.0.2. And that's all we need to do. Just the IP address of the domain controller. It'll be on Microsoft.com. So it's authorized in Active Directory. And now we have, there's a couple other things I need to do. One is, we have to make a couple changes to our scope, or add some things to our scope. So I'll just say set as DHCP server v4 scope, and we'll say scope ID 10.0.0.0. We'll say give it, so we'll say router. Never mind. So something that might not work. So then let's try another command. So we'll say set DHCP server v4 option definition. Or we can even do option day. So what should happen should be router. So router will be my router information, and then the server is going to be pointing to. Which will be 10.0.0.2. And I do believe, if we did this correctly, that should be it. Alright. Now, I'm going to say, before we do this, get DHCP server in DC. Whoops. And there it is. This is what I wanted to see. And this is our IP address of our domain controller. And then this is the DNS name that is associated with said DHCP server. So now, the DHCP server is now set up. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and set me up with a, I'm going to close out of this DHCP server. And what should happen now is flash all. And right now it's still pulling from, it's not pulling from the other IP, the DHCP server yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a release. And here we go. Just give it a few moments. And what's going to happen now is, because it's still pulling from it's still pulling from this. I want it to pull from, and it's not pulling from, it's not bringing up the other IP address, which is exactly what we wanted. So we're still doing some troubleshooting there. Alright, I'm going to try something real fast. Let me just go ahead and disable IPv6 on this machine. Wait a second. Should be Network and Sharing Center. Alright, so let's go back up here. Let's go back to the DHCP server. Find it. Name should be Alright, so we're just doing some troubleshooting, that's all. But I think we may have. I'll see. So it should be dash all. So I think we might have found our little issue. It's not going to ping. I bet it's not probably not going to ping that address until I join this domain. So we'll try that. And what I want to do is just do it through this and then see if this will work. Actually, just to do a tester, we'll do it from the system, system and control panel, and see if this will work. And let's see, go to Alright, so it's not pulling this address, and sometimes I've had to do things like something like a file share or something like that. Oops. File, it should be file server. Let's see. We're having a little technical issue where for whatever reason, I cannot ping my own DHCP server, which is weird. Let's see if I can do it from my machine. Here's one other way I can do this, and that is going through, sometimes I've had to do this, sometimes to get it to join, I've had to go up to adapter settings, set this static temporarily on this one, but this is what I've had to do in the past. I had to go through, set it to a dot, O2, and then when you go up to the system settings, and you'll see this show up. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to go ahead, we're going to do this from PowerShell, which makes it much easier. So what we'll do, let's bring up PowerShell, and I am going to go ahead and add this to the domain, just like this. So add-computer domain name port1 .onmicrosoft.com, and then credential administrator -restore. So this is how you would join a machine to the domain from PowerShell. You saw this when we did DHCP. What we'll do, type in the password, and we'll restart our machine. And so give it a few moments while this reboots. And now you'll see that this is now up, and you'll see to sign into my domain. So I'll say, which sometimes this will happen. Once we create our user account, which I'm going to do in a second, this will make this a little bit much easier. I'm we're just going to test a few things, see if there's a Alright, so now we are on the domain, and as you can see, we should still have connectivity even after we joined if we configured the DNS correctly. So we'll go ahead and and hit close. And we should still have internet connectivity. Okay. Now, sorry about that. Alright. So we'll go ahead and start by closing out of that. Now, when we go up to when as an administrator, ipconfig/all, and this just verifies that we are connecting to the right machine. And what I can do is, so it's still pulling from the Comcast side of things, and that's why it's causing issues. And it's still not pulling the other machine. So, what I'm going to go ahead and do to fix our issue, let's fix our DHCP server, because we're having a little issue there. So, and I'm going to go ahead and, in the meantime, let's go ahead and just run an RSAT tool for DHCP so I can see what's going on. So we'll go up to Apps, Optional Features, Add a Feature, and just look for DHCP and DNS, and we'll just install those two. And while we're doing that, I am going to go ahead and reconfigure this DHCP server, because now the DHCP server is our problem. So let's go ahead and uninstall Windows Feature DHCP. Management tools, include we'll just go ahead and just uninstall this. So what we're having is an issue where for some reason we're not able to ping this DHCP server. So we need to figure out what exactly is going on. While we're doing that, I'm going to go over to this, and this is, by the way, this is what the DHCP server will look like. It'll look something like this, and once you have, and you'll see once we get this back situated. So we'll show you this once we reconfigure DHCP. I'll show you guys how to configure DHCP from here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just minimize this, and then type in administrator, and once let's do this. And I'll show you a little trick you can use if you need to, if you want to get into this thing remotely. PS remoting. This little trick will allow me to come from a machine, and I can then remote back into it. Alright, so we'll go ahead and close out of that server, and I'm just going to go back into here. Alright. And let's just type in PowerShell. let's just enter. Remember this command here. If we can make this a little bit bigger. All right, and just do enter dash ps session DHCP 01 dash SRB. What should now happen? You'll see right now I'm backdoored back onto that DHCP server. So now what I'm going to do is just do install dash Windows feature dash name DHCP, include management tools, include all sub-feature. And what's going to happen is it's going to install that role. Of course, I'm installing this server role remotely. Let's just give this a few moments. And to configure this, you just go up to this. I'm using remote server admin tools to connect here. I'm not on that server. So what I'm doing is we'll look for, so what we want is RV alright, so we're on it, and what you can do is you want to just give it a few seconds, by the way, and then what I have to do is it has to be authorized in Active Directory. So in order to do that, just go up to right click over here, like this IP address, right click and hit authorize. Let's give it a few moments. While we're doing that, I'm just going to right click. I just right clicked on IPv4, click on new scope, and you'll give it this little box. This is welcome to the new scope, the wizard. Hit continue. We'll call this DHCP. Let's just say my DHCP server. Just the same way, just what we were trying to accomplish on PowerShell. 0.0.30. We'll say 10.0.0.150. And then we'll set this to 24. Oops. So click next with an existing scope. And so looks like there's already a scope here. So we'll go ahead and just get rid of this scope. Service. And then, so what we want to do is I want to modify the scope. So I'm just going to change this to 150. Click OK, and what should happen is that let's go back up there, just run as an administrator, and then see if I can ping this IP address this time, and it's not. We're still having trouble pinging that address. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, and I'm just going to go directly to that server, figure out what's going on there. Because we're not able to ping it. So obviously there's something going on. Let's go back to that server directly. This will be DHCP right here. config 8. Yeah, so this is the problem. The server is the issue. Because when I try to change the IP address, I can't change it. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and this one, what we're just going to have to do, unfortunately, I'm going to have to well, I shouldn't say that, but I'm going to have to re-image. I have to re-image this server because what's happening is I got this thing is corrupted. So there's our problem, and this server is the issue. So what we need to do is I'm just going to go through and re-image this server because this one is acting up and it should not be. So what we'll do is I'm going to go ahead and reset this. I tried to reboot it, see if that does anything, but I totally doubt it. Because what happens is I should be able to go into sconfig and change the IP, and that's why we're not able to ping this address. So go to 8. Yeah, there's something corrupted on this server. So what I'm going to go ahead and do right now is we're just going to go through, re-image this, re-image this machine. Okay. Good news is because this is a core server, it's not going to take very long for me to get back up and running. So I think we found our issue. It was the server itself. So hit next, hit install. Alright, so click on this because I want this to be server core. That's perfectly fine. Just give this a few moments. If you like what I'm showing you, feel free to please like the video and subscribe to the channel. I totally appreciate it. Tomorrow we'll be doing another class at 5 p.m. We'll be talking more about DHCP, DNS. I'll also have my regular machine will also be on the domain, and I'll show you a lot more good stuff as far as, and we'll be setting up also a file server. And things like that. So we'll be getting into that starting tomorrow. I'll also talk about users and groups, permissions, group policy, things like that. So let's see if I can just do this, get this one done real quick. once I get this thing settled, I'll go ahead and get it up to date. But what I'll do is just go through, go to this, change that to yes, make sure, set this to 0.0.5 like I had it. If we want, hang on, if we want, that's on .15, so that's fine. So we'll just say .5. 0, and then just like 2, and we'll say new preferred DNS server. So I'll just put it to the domain controller like we had it. And then alter domain, turn to previous menu. And so let's go ahead and minimize this. I'm going to go back into our workstation. And let's close out of that for right now. So go over here, go back in the command prompt, and before I do anything else, let's just make sure I can ping that address. And I still cannot, for whatever reason. Alright, so unfortunately we are having some difficulties with the DHCP server. So I'm going to spend like 10 minutes. We'll try to figure it out. If not, I will fix this over the course of tonight. And then tomorrow during class we'll have this DHCP server ready to go. I had to do a little bit of troubleshooting to get this situated, but let's go through, and I want to talk about this for a second. These are different little features, different options that you'll get. This will be pointing back to your domain. This is your router. Things like that. So I can point to all the other domain controllers, but I can't point to our the other one. I can point to 0.15, or can I not? No, I cannot. So there are some issues that I'm having. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up the class today. I'm going to definitely do some troubleshooting, figure out what's going on and what's causing our issue, and then tomorrow when I come back we'll talk about the steps I had to take to get this back to work. So thank you all very much, have a good evening, and we'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m.